This is a pretty interesting topic, but I'm going to do my best to keep it brief and concise. I just got back from an echo training. They gave us this sheet here and told us to use it to, show it to customers, use it to help explain, like, hey, this is why an engine failed. So I figured, that's kind of a cue to just put it out there. It's something you can find online, so it doesn't seem like it's any sort of industry secret information or anything like that. This sheet here just covers a bunch of different types of engine failures on two strokes, and I have a few examples other than these pictures on this sheet, but everything on here is pretty clearly explained, and that's something that is kind of hard to find. So they cover failures from raw gas. Generally, that piston is going to be scored all the way around. Two-stroke failures on raw gas look pretty ugly because there's no lubrication in that engine. So it is going to be heavy wear and heavy scoring, but if you look at the underside of the piston, typically there's no heat damage. Going from there, we have another one that's overheating, and that one has heavy scoring, really heavy scoring on one side of the piston, but the piston also gets discolored from heat damage, and that's burnt oil or just metals changing color, because they'll start to do that after they heat up. Another one is ingestion, and it doesn't have to be dirt. It can be sand, sawdust, any sort of foreign object that engine decides it's going to eat, or that gets past the air filter. If it's fine dust, this is more of an example of fine dust that's run through there, where you get some pretty clear wear patterns. If you have a larger object, little piece of grit or something, or anything harder than the aluminum itself, it's going to tear into a motor real heavy. Probably put a gouge in the cylinder bore or the piston or both. And then we cover a lean seizure. This is one of the things that can happen from an over rev. Is your engine stops fueling. You end up revving so high that your carburetor can't compensate, and you run out of fuel, and you're putting more air through the engine than your carburetor can handle, and your motor leans out. It gets hot, scores heavy on one side. You got to remember your intake side is still getting fuel run across it, but not near as much as it should, and then the exhaust gets pretty hot, and just eats itself. And then here's another one that's not near as common, is stale fuel. I've only seen probably one engine with deposits, and it was nowhere near like they show on this picture. That's something that I'm not even sure how they would have gotten that motor started. But yeah, there's varnish on every surface on the inside of there, and you can see it pretty clearly. And then uncertified or non-certified oils. This is not as common as it was years ago. Used to, you would run 30 weight motor oil, non-detergent motor oil, mixed in fuel, and it would leave a lot of deposits on the piston, more along the lines of combustion deposits versus the varnish that you see in the stale fuel photo. And then I have a few examples of some of these failures. this motor went from ingestion, and I'm going to try and line up the transfer that got damaged and shine a light down in there. Try and catch it on the camera. Camera doesn't want to look down in there. I'm trying. Come on, camera. Focus. It is not going to catch it. But you can see that blurry line back down in there. Dang it, I wish this thing... There it goes. And it's gone again. But you can see that heavy score in that cylinder. That is lined up directly with one of your transfers. So something entered this little port here, went all the way down inside of there, got spit out onto the top of the piston. The top of the piston caught it. Right there. And held it in place for a minute and just dug through the plating in that cylinder, causing it lack of compression. This one has also seen some signs of ingestion. This is your intake side. It's had a little bit of stuff run through it, leaving scoring in the sides of the piston. And the exhaust side is scored pretty evenly as well. Everything else in this motor was pretty oily, so it's not like it got improperly mixed fuel through it. It was just stuff getting past the air filter, being run without an air filter, and you can see the saw lived a pretty dirty life. So that's not uncommon to see ingestion wear on a cylinder that looks like this. Here's a saw that got overheated. This is the exhaust side of the piston. You can tell there's usually a mark where the exhaust, a mark that faces the exhaust port. Just ugly scoring. And on the sides, you can see where there's burnt oil and it's turning colors. And then underneath and inside, you can see that the oil was burning. That's what's leaving that black residue. Tan is okay. You don't really want to see it. You don't really want to see any sort of colored deposits, but you can see in here pretty clearly that on the underside of the crown of that piston, there's just burnt oil deposits. The intake side has some scoring too, not nearly as bad as the exhaust, but I imagine that started to happen as that piston heated up, started to swell inside of there. Here's the cylinder, if the camera will catch it. Intake side. I'll fumble around here a little bit, but I'm not going to sit there and make y'all look at blurry images the whole time. Exhaust side, that's the one that's ate up more. Main thing to take away is this is still pretty shiny. You can see some of the scoring down in there, but it's fairly shined up. So this is one that overheated. We're gonna come back to it. Here's one that looks to me like a raw gas failure, all the way around 360. Terrible scoring. This is a very damaged piston. This motor came in with no compression. But on the underside of here, you look at everything, It's clean. There's no burnt oil. If there was oil in there, this thing would have been hot and the oil would have been burning and sticking to the underside of this piston. This one looks really clean. So this looks like a raw gas failure to me. I broke that getting it off. That's not something that broke and destroyed us all, but it's pretty easy to see the saw wasn't in great shape, so I wasn't worried about keeping that piston safe. If we'll catch this cylinder bore, I don't think it will. Try using the light again. There we go. Yeah, that whole thing is streaked up pretty good. It's like it won't focus inside of there. It wants to catch other stuff around it. But yeah, bore's cylinder's toast. Now here we go. Brings us around to the question of what causes this overheating failure. We're going to circle back to this one. What caused that motor to overheat? A big issue on saws, especially if it's the newer ones, is improperly sharpened chains. And this chain can have a really good sharp tooth on it and still not cut. The whole reason behind that is if this depth gauge is the same height as the cutting edge on your tooth, you're not going to take any wood off when that tooth goes by. That's like running that saw in free rev. They can handle free rev a little bit, but really anything past 5-10 seconds, 5 is all the manual recommends you do. Anything past that and you're asking for trouble. So let's bring this back into focus. This depth gauge is pretty close to the same height as this tooth, and we'll see if we can get that. Yeah, looking at that razor blade, you have a little bit of tilt down, but not a whole lot. If you take that depth gauge down a little bit, when you sharpen a chain, you're supposed to file this down. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of shops don't do it. If a customer comes in and teeth are far down like this, I'll talk to them about it. He usually just adds a little bit to the sharpening feed to take these things down because it just takes more time in a shop. So this chain is not one that you want to run on the saw because it's just going to either run the engine with no load, or if you sit there and force it, you're going to load the engine and lug it, which means it's not operating efficiently anymore. It's going to heat up the clutch is going to start slipping, and then your engine goes back to free revving again. You're not cutting anything, you're not doing any work, you're just tearing up a motor. That brings us to this little guy here. If I shake y'all all around, if we can see inside of there, yep, there's another piston. Whole lot of scoring on it. Rings are seized. It's all scraped up, nothing sealing anymore. Saw's got no compression. Underneath that's just a messy, dirty workbench. But yep, failure analysis. It's just kind of handy. It's almost a checklist of things, what not to do. Yeah. So there you go. That's your one for this evening.